to call the session to order at 9:05, excuse me. And we'd like to conduct the roll call. Just previous to that, thank you everyone for understanding and coming down to Conference Room C with us. We felt this was a better venue for the process for this workshop. So clerk, will you conduct roll call, please?
Supervisor McCallum?
Here.
Supervisor Finches? Supervisor Smith?
Here.
Supervisor Colfax?
Here.
Chair Brown?
Here. I want to make an announcement. I've just been informed that closed session is going to take longer than anticipated, so we may not be out at 10:30, but we may go in sooner too, depending how long that this process goes on the workshop. So I would like to ask Ms. Angelo to please introduce the topic for the workshop.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. This is a planning session regarding our Mendocino County 2011 Public Policy Prioritization Initiative. And if you could bear with me just a couple minutes, I'd like to give a brief history of how we got to today's one-hour session. I've been in the executive office since September of 2009, 6 months as the assistant CEO and now 5 months as the chief executive officer. And when I came to the executive office and began to work on some of our very key issues, particularly those around our budget and around service reduction, I realized that in the executive office, we hadn't really worked with our board of supervisors to develop a roadmap to get us to where we needed to go. There were really little or no board priorities that had been established that were current. No public policies really to guide us, to guide the executive office and the departments on setting priorities or working with the board or the department. So, in these uncertain times, it really seemed important that we could take the time to really work with this board and have this board set the priorities for us to move forward in the future, whether it was creating service initiatives or whether it was service reduction, that we really needed to have that guidance. So what we've been talking about in the executive office and with the department heads is a public policy and priority setting workshop that we would have in January of 2011 with this board, and that would help us with the ongoing structural deficit and also with the development of the 11-12 budget. But as we began to talk about having that workshop in January, some on this board pointed out that we still don't have all the information, and that possibly what would be helpful would be if we reached out to the community for more input. That certainly there's community engagement in the sense that people come to the board meetings, they voice their opinions, they make recommendations, but there are 90,000 people in this county. And how do we really reach out to get additional information? And so with that, as a precursor to the January 2011 workshop, or workshops that we have, 2 of them, is that we would like to have a process, a community engagement process that would really be targeted focus groups and some other community conversations to really look at strategic areas for policy discussion and to be able to bring that information back in January. So the executive office has been working with Mr. Steve Slybeck, who is a consultant and lives here in Mendocino County, but I have to say that Steve is internationally recognized as a consultant and as a facilitator and as a teacher. And we are extremely fortunate that he is willing to volunteer his time to work with us in the executive office and the board and the community in this process. And I'm very appreciative of that. How this started was, of course, facilitation for chaotic times that I actually took in the fall. And in that course, what happened was the members that were taking this actually were looking at forming a volunteer facilitator pool. And so in talking with Steve and some of the other members in the course, it's clear that we have enough interest in the community where we could have volunteer facilitators that would be either from the facilitation course or part of the Window Futures that could help us with the focus groups. So with that, I would like to go ahead and turn this over to Steve to walk us through the process.
I'm going to just pull my chair up here if that's okay, and I apologize, my back is to everyone, but I'll probably be working over there. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity of coming and providing you an update. It's kind of opportunity to talk about next steps, and what we really like to do at the end of whatever time we have today is to get some of your thoughts and your inputs and reactions to what we're proposing. We, so far, as you know, I've had several meetings with Carmel and Christy talking about some of the challenges the county faces. We've talked with each of you individually just to get your thoughts about such a process and scoping of a process. And the decision really has been to have a process that informs the chief executive officer so that, in this case, Carmel and staff can put together a set of recommendations to bring forward to you in this policy setting workshop come January. So what our desire is to engage in a variety of ways, both formal and informal conversations with people across the county in a way of testing various key possible policy areas of focus so that Carmel can develop some of those recommendations, and then we're going to spend, ideally, we'll spend our time in January talking about those particular recommendations so that you have a set of priorities, areas of focus come the beginning of the next calendar year. That's our desire. And what we intend to do, and in a moment I'm going to get into some areas of what we'd really like your input on and create a conversation. We intend to have a series of informal focus groups, and what those would be is sitting together with targeted organizations, targeted stakeholder groups, and individuals to test some of these recommendations, to get reactions to those possible recommendations as they move forward to you in January. I would envision both open sessions in the community. Carmel and other people will have conversations in the course of normal work and include this kind of conversation to test some of these policy areas from now and through to probably the end of December. So we hope to engage people in a variety of ways, and we actually hope to get some of your thoughts in addition to what we're thinking about what those ways might be. But what I'd really like to do at this point is to engage you, if we could go to the next slide, to these possible areas of policy. And if you look in the kind of in 2/3 of the way down on this page, we want to actually get your thoughts and a conversation around these areas. With these, just at the outset, would these be the kinds of areas that, no matter what your position is right now, those are the areas that we ought to be engaged in a conversation annually, that policy and direction will be necessary in those areas. Before we go any further, we wanted to get your input in these areas. So we have service priorities, service redesign internally, the whole issue of public-private partnerships, the issue of regionalization, centralization, and job and revenue generation. And what I'd really like to do is get your reaction, your questions, and your thoughts. There might be whole big areas of potential policy development that you would feel would be critical for us to go out and get feedback from various members of the community, whether they're individuals or stakeholder groups or constituencies. So there may be questions.
Madam Chair, I'd like to just make one comment on the areas that we have listed here. As you know, I have been going out and doing meet and greets, basically meeting with departments, and there's a common theme that comes out in almost all of those meetings. There's a certain set of questions, a I pretty much know before I walk in the room what those questions are going to be. The areas that we have listed here around priorities, service redesign, partnerships, regionalization, these are all areas that have come up either within board discussions, within the board chamber, within the department meetings, and so objectively we're looking at these. One other comment I'd like to make is that when we're talking about regionalization, I'd like to look at that in a broader context. We're not necessarily talking about regionalization within the county. We can look at regionalization across counties. That's more of the concept that we're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that in mind, we were hoping just for an open conversation, dialogue, questions you might have, pros and cons, additional areas. So can I just open it up and I'll do some charting after we have that conversation? Some of your thoughts?
Does that agree to? Sure.
Does that work?
Yes.
Okay. So it's open. Comments, thoughts, reactions, concerns?
Well, these are very broad general categories, and as we've heard others say, the devil is in the details, but I certainly think those are the appropriate categories.
And would there be any categories that are not on that list that we should be exploring, as Carol said, in an open way, a productive way, and bring that forward in our January work together?
I got a question.
Sure.
How do you define a key constituent?
Well, we're hoping
We
actually.
should identify key constituents. I tend to view all of my constituents pretty much on
Not as individuals, but as groupings of people. Could be clusters, it could be organizations, it could be whole sectors that we want to make sure we would go out and address, not so much as an individual. And we'd love to get your thoughts about that as well. To make certain that when Carmel Angela goes out and gets that feedback, develops some possible recommendations to consider, that you feel as a group, well, we talked to the right people that would be representative, the right groups of people.
We often think that is either high-profile individuals or groups in the community, but I think we should also be trying to hear from the people that we actually provide service to, and also our employees who provide the services.
I'm open. If you want to continue to talk, I can chart and listen at the same time pretty much, so I'll get both comments that you had. So it's the people we provide service to and the employees who deliver the service. Is that correct? Key here is if I can, permission, if I can push a little bit. If you imagine yourself in a workshop come January, where we're talking about, and the devils, we have some of the details now, at least one perspective on what those details might look like in those areas. What would you need to be certain of that those recommendations coming forward were reflective and accurate, as opposed to say, well, that's just certain people's ideas or concerns. So we actually got a good take on those issues, those possible policy issues. So you go, well, okay, this is really what the community, the broad community is saying.
If you talk to 100 people, you might get 100 opinions. So.
Well, I view good feedback would come from different age groups. Certainly a centralized area. I want to make sure we reach out to every part of the county, but have the meetings held in a centralized area that's easy for people to get to, that's well publicized. especially, I look at, North County, the far south coast, the north coast. I have concerns that, if we're going to be reaching out, we must do so, in a fair manner.
Well, if you really wanted to reach out, we might have one meeting in Laytonville and one in Wallala and one in Boonville.
That's possible.
So meetings dispersed across the areas of the county, in those areas, okay? Other thoughts, either about how or who, or even as importantly, are those the areas that we really need to go out and gather the input? There's something, we really are hoping if there's something that's missing off of that list, regardless of what your position may be, that we could go out and test those areas.
Well, on the subjects listed, as Supervisor McCallum stated, they are broad. However, I think as Carmel talked about her meetings that she's had with county staff, more comes up, so it starts a theme. And you'll be able to focus more. Regionalization, could I have a better definition? I think, Ms. Angelo talked about other counties. And so what is kind of a definition of that? What were your thoughts?
Well, usually when we talk about regionalization, we focus on a regional approach or service versus centralized. And particularly as we've been moving through a budget process, we know that depending on the service, that a regional service throughout the county may be more costly than if we centralize the service. So there's that component to centralization versus regionalization, and that's really something to look at as we move through 10, 11, and 11, 12. Regionalization in general, what I would really like this board and the public to consider is, are there certain areas that we could regionalize with other counties? And for instance, with Sonoma County and Napa County, we've had an EMS system. With the three counties, we've had an agency, and that has been quite effective, particularly for Mendocino County, because we're so large and we really lack resources when it comes to emergency medical services. So can we look at a greater regional approach, possibly with Lake County, Sonoma County, Humboldt, Trinity? Are there some areas that we can look at? There may be even some mandated services that are across the counties. Every county has their own public health officer. Every county has their own TV control officer. Are there some areas that we can look at where we could actually share those resources? And I would not want to embark on that process of working with other counties unless I knew what the public perception was and certainly what the direction was from this board. Right? But I do think the regionalization across counties is something over the next few years we will be looking at more and more. Particularly, we have a state that has an $18 billion budget deficit, and a lot of our services are state funded. So, I hesitate to think that the state will continue to fund the counties at the same level they've been doing.
And where I'm going in asking these questions, when you meet with groups, I think there has to be some type of an example given in areas, and maybe it's pre-publicized so people are thinking ahead of time rather than just coming to the meeting and they have deeper thought put into whatever type of information or priorities that they feel they want to share. But I do think an explanation needs to go with each one of the categories, so people are focused.
I think, it's a great point, and, I'm going to share this, our thinking, and you may want, collectively or individually, want to push back on what our approach might be for some of the kind of community interactions, but that would be coming with where we are, current state of the issue. Because people without a context, it's important to understand not only budget, but kind of service delivery, but some setting of the context so people are coming from a similar platform or starting point. Also coming with, here's a particular issue, here's what it might look like. Here are some real possibilities of what policy could look like, and actually testing the specifics of those. So we don't end up with general statements. The chief executive officer actually ends up with a way of evaluating the kinds of recommendations and policies that she would bring back to you. So it's not way up the top, but it actually gets down to where it can help formulate significant recommendations. And what you do with them, of course, and that's the process of the board, to come with a specific plan and recommendations. That's what we're looking at. So it won't be real broad. What do you think about service redesign? People would just say, well, we think it's a good idea, of course, but specific areas of what that could mean, what the consequences, the pros and cons, and then actually test where is there support? What specific kinds of recommendations would be supported by the community? So that's our desire. If you have some different thoughts, we'd love to hear before we embark on this. That's why we're coming. Just to say, if you have any concerns, thoughts, additions, before we go and launch off of this activity.
Well, I'll jump in.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. I won't be at that meeting here. I guarantee I'll be here, out there.
Okay.
Maybe I'll be a little more direct than usual. Is that possible? Being halfway the decision. I think we need to be really careful in going this direction. There is such a thing as pseudo-participation. I think this county has a history of doing a symbolic meeting out there in the boondocks. And it's like the king going out, riding through, tipping his hat to the peasants, and then moving right on through and doing what he was going to do. But now he can claim legitimacy and authority. And I look around here, what we have the usual suspects in the room. Okay, organizationally, we have staff, and we have a couple of organizations represented. The usual organizations that show here you guys on a regular basis, the Farm Bureau and the Employers Council. Thank you for coming. But the question I have here is, when we go out and do this, how much leverage, how much connectivity are we going to maintain? And I would say the primary concern here, I was disappointed. The fact is regionalization across counties. Oh, that's not what I thought you meant. I appreciate that. But I thought regionalization within the county is, I think, perhaps even more critical if you're talking about getting genuine participation and involvement. Because I had a car following me over from Anderson Valley this morning, and I thought, oh, good, we're going to have somebody from Anderson Valley. They pulled off at the split road there sooner than I did. But the concern I have here is, even if we were able to identify all the right people, could we rely on their participation with the nuts and bolts and problems that we have here that are not really part of their organizational or daily life commitments and obligations?
So can I ask a follow-up question to make sure I understand? So, first off, to make sure it's not just pseudo-participation, like we went out and got, we did these things and then we're going to make whatever recommendations in the name of the we actually had people say this is the direction. I heard that, and that's important. You also said regionalization is here, not exclusive, but we should check on regionalization within the county. But this last point that you were making had to do with, can we really count on them, or can they, or is it, can they really grasp the complexities and nuts and bolts of what you're dealing with in order to make effective recommendations?
I think it's a question, Steve, of engagement. How much of a payoff is there? What, am I going to travel 2 hours from, again, the Class A, Walla, or coming down from Garberville? Oh, sorry. But, anyhow, the problem is that what's in it for me as a citizen? What do we get out of it in my local community? And I keep pointing out here that there are 12 different towns in my district, the 5th district. And they, for the most part, don't care a bit about what's happening in the town 8 miles up the road, or 18 miles, or 35 or 50 miles up the road. And so that's the concern I have here about the people behave. We don't have institutional configuration that we would have if we were kind of a federated system of city-states. We don't have city-states in Mendocino County. We have little hamlets, towns, and aggregations.
Thank you. And there was going to be another comment, I believe, or a question.
Supervisors?
Yes, I have a question, a few for you, Steve. If we could go to this discussion point, which I think is a blow-up of, is this a PowerPoint? Yes, I guess that would be the word used. Or we're not having another presentation besides just this sheet? We're not having another visual?
That's it.
Okay. So, going down to item number 3, which has step taken to date. So you've been meeting with the CEO, I've been meeting with each individual board member, getting input on a proposed draft plan. So what date has been set? It says, and a date has been set to meet with an initial community group to identify key constituents and stakeholders. What is that date?
August the 23rd.
And is this initial community group identified?
There are people that have been selected in the purpose of bringing, we can give you those names if you like.
I would like those names, yes.
But the purpose of that is for that group to take this feedback and to look at those issues, those possible priority issues, and then generate a much expanded list of organizations, individuals. So their role isn't the group that we're going to go get the feedback from,
Right.
but to identify all of those various constituent groups and individuals who we should get feedback from as just part of this process. That won't be the only way. So that group is coming together on the 23rd, to answer your question.
So how did you identify the initial community group?
That group of people. Really what we're going to do is we're going to follow the concept of people who have a lot of key connections, not formal and informal, people who are involved in lots of different issues, lots of different communities, and that those people have a huge network of connections. They know who are the other people that also have similar level of connectivity. They're not formal leaders necessarily at all, but so it's really coming from the research of adoption of an idea curve, and I can show you that if you like, if you want to see what that's about or not. I want to be very mindful of your time. But they would be what are called early adopters, the group that we invited, and their task would be to identify the other early adopters across the county with these kinds of criterion that you've identified, and those as some of the matrix of the issues, which should cover everybody. But that's what their work will be.
So you're saying this initial group has been identified?
That is correct.
So yes, I absolutely would like that list. Now, this August 26th meeting, where is that going to
The
take place?
23rd.
23rd, where is it going to take place?
Yes, it's conference room A.
Okay.
Just for an initial session, it probably takes just a couple hours to do that work.
Okay, to segue that, so going from that, those that process, the delineation of that process that you just gave us. Going down to these public policy areas that have been identified here on the list, starting with service priorities. Then could you take us from paragraph 3 here, steps taken to date, and then get down to the next steps? Because the concern I have is where you have next steps, you've got the CEO working with staff drafting a series of potential policy recommendations. Is that without the input of the initial community group and the key constituents and stakeholders?
That's based on all of that input. They're not, we're going to draft some tentative rough things, rough concepts to then test. But the actual recommendations that will come to you as a board in the policy setting in January will reflect all of the recommendations from these various meetings that are going to be held. But we want to make sure that we're just not coming with generalities around these, but that, as I explained before, this is what these issues might look like on the ground in terms of the nuts and bolts of these issues. And we want to provide a context to folks so that they understand the complexities.
Well, I guess I'm concerned about that because
Okay.
you're talking about these that the CEO working with staff has come up with these. And so it's really not, in other words, it's rather a circuitous route through the decision makers, being the board of supervisors, that our input is really not part of this these tested components. In other words, I think it's being already pre-directed, if you will, to sort of lead the community discussions. And it would seem to me that it would be a wiser course of action to have a process, some process, and I am having to think of this just in a moment, not having received this with any advance, just as everyone is just getting it right here now. It would seem to me that you would want to do a little more due diligence with the community prior to coming up with these tested models that then they respond to. It seems to me that some work should be spent in that arena in order to come up with these in other words, it's back to the thing about it already being really pre-directed to a particular sort of way with where we're going, given budget constraints and so forth. I think we all know what those particulars are. But I think we might get different responses or have a different process if we did some of that work up front. And so I guess I'm questioning the model because it doesn't really allow for that. All it is having these already preconceived policy recommendations that then folks respond to.
This is great feedback. We were hoping that today's session would be part of what you're asking for by all of your responses to those issues and anything else that you can further provide to us that would help
Well,
create the direction.
I think it takes more sort of. I think one needs to step back and look at the partnerships that already exist. I mean, some of this is really going on. For instance, I sit on MCOG. MCOG is already doing part of this regional blueprint process, obtaining money from the state. Lake County has already moved forward, but what the state is really looking at is regional approaches to transportation. So funding sources from the state are already directing a regional approach. With every entity, a regional approach is going to differ depending on the core service delivery and the mission of that entity. In other words, there are already some models at work, and so this doesn't really sort of put that into the discussion, and I think some of the existing models could be a framework for continuing to do that. Another very, very good example is the integrated water management planning. It's a regional process, and it's one that has helped Mendocino County obtain several $1 million for core water projects on the ground for residents. So that model is already alive and well, and it's 7 Northern California counties. So that's a regional approach with respect to water. So we have water and transportation, and I think we have some other models that are in the Health and Human Services realm that we partner with Lake County on as well. So we have some systems that exist. Certainly more could be developed, but you know, we might want to take existing models, use those to educate the initial community group, the key constituents and stakeholders about what exists, and see if they come up with some parallel ideas within their area of concern or expertise. So,
Perfect. That's exactly why we wanted to come, and thank you. We can do that kind of work. That's why we wanted to come to you first before we did anything else, is to get your reaction, your input, your concerns, your feedback, so that we collectively take the right steps forward. And so thank you. And there might, if there's more to that, I would love to, more examples in areas, and there may be other thoughts along. I'd be curious if that's similar thinking for the other board members as well.
Steve, just to pick up on that, you see, like more on that, I would say here at this juncture, we would say, well, to what extent are we actually as a board looking into the two items with regard to transportation, with regard to water? Are we as a board, from a policy perspective, investing time and resources? And I think that's an area that goes beyond this. We already have that information. We have the structure. We have the policy aspects of it, at least in a formal sense. But how much are we investing in that set of systems that's already out there? Do we really need to create new systems based on a new input system that's before us right now?
So I'm hearing, look at practices that we're investigating and we're in some stage of development, looking within about regional efforts. It would probably be related to every one of those. What's already existing, what's the research and the context behind that, and allow that to guide a framework, so to speak, that we can test, particularly around those things that are working, and learnings from what's not working as well. That's what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's perfect.
And I think that goes back to the information prior, so people are focused when they attend and ready for input. So I appreciate Supervisor Smith's comments.
And it might address somewhat of Supervisor Colfax's earlier comment, but it's going to, we have to think more about it, is the what's in it for me. It's as an individual, but it's also as people are working on these areas already. That's a lot of their time and energy. We want to make sure that we honor that, and that it's embraced in the work. People don't go, well, if they would have just asked us, we're already working on this, for example. So it's not, that's not the complete answer. That's part of it. This whole flip chart is all part as we speak. Sorry about that.
So supervisors, if there isn't further comment, I'm sorry.
If, at the top of the page, it talks about strategic policy development process. At the bottom of the page, it talks about a draft strategic plan. And, the way that the county's finances, the revenues are decreasing, and as an example, 2 years ago, we were trying to come up with a plan what to do with our redevelopment money until the state comes in and takes our redevelopment money. So, how can we really talk about until our revenues are basically stabilized? Even our road fund is probably the most stable, has been historically the most stable source of revenues that counties have had. And now it seems to be, for a lot of different reasons, it's in jeopardy. I mean, we don't even have a federal highway transportation bill signed right now. They're just extending it a year. So I'm not so sure, how we can lead to a strategic draft plan when we don't even know 6 months from now what our revenues are going to be. I mean, we're kind of, our revenue's been in free fall, so it kind of eliminates, it's kind of like going across the ocean. If we can't keep our boat afloat, how can we worry about which country we're going to sail to? So, I mean, it leads to all kinds of problems, but it's just, in all these lists, they're all, and another question I have, just maybe is more of a comment, is this initial community group, is this just kind of away from an end run around the Board of Supervisors making budgetary recommendations or setting the budget? I mean, we go to very extensive public meetings to get every group and every individual to come in, and emails and phone calls. Today, I just got through this morning. This morning, I had 39 messages on my answer machine. So I feel there's a pretty good outreach out there. I'm not so sure that we have to have more public meetings and all that. But I don't know and that's why I asked my original question a little bit ago about what's a key constituent, because to me, I try to treat all of them. I mean, there's organizations and everything, but individuals, I try to treat everybody on a level basis and kind of put myself in a position. And frankly, that's why the people voted for me, because they felt that I had a pretty good ability to represent the people out there. So I don't really know where this is all leading to. I'm just kind of confused by this whole process. It all comes down to money. Everything we talk about here really comes down to one thing, and that's money. You either have money to fund something, or you don't have it. And here we are trying to keep our libraries and our museums and things like that open and keep a certain amount of service out there. And then we're talking about, well, let's don't really talk about that. Let's talk about some strategic plan for what's going to happen 5 years from now. We need to be more up to date, more focused on what's going to happen in 6 months from now, rather than worry about five years from now. That's my opinion.
Well, personally, I see this supervisor pinches as a good process for the public to further engage in what are the priorities and how we can go forward in the environment that we're in today, and I don't think it's going to end very soon. I feel that we do need a plan going out 3-5 years into the future. I do feel that certainly this will gain this board a lot of information on a countywide perspective. And that's what we serve as our county supervisors, not just within a specific district. So I feel this process would be a very good one, and I'm very much in support of it, and very excited to hear the outcomes and look forward to the workshop in January 2011 to receive back the input and have further discussion. I think this is a process that's doing what individual supervisors cannot do. They don't have the time. Certainly we answer phone calls. We visit with constituents out in the districts. We do so at countywide events. But I see this as a very important process in moving forward. Supervisor McCallum.
Thank you, Chair Brown. I agree with your comments. I think that this process could be very worthwhile. It's often the case, although it's an open process, we make all our decisions at open public meetings with an agenda. We often make our decisions essentially in a vacuum because there's very few people are attending and giving input on most items. It's something of an exception when we get more than 5 people who are willing to speak to any issue. So I think reaching out to the community, as long as it's to a broad spectrum of the community, including the people we serve and the people who provide the service, I think could be very promising in getting some ideas, getting feedback in a general way that we don't often get. When we do have discussions on items, it's to a specific item, we're being asked to take a specific action, and it really doesn't allow generally for a broad-ranging discussion on what our big picture priorities ought to be. And I think that process is always worthwhile. I think it's beneficial to the county to take a longer range view. I've often heard at budget discussions, why are we just looking at a 1-year budget? Why aren't we trying to plan for 2 years, 3 years, or further down the road? And I think the CEO has recently put us on that course. which I think is appropriate. I would expect that some of the people that would be involved in these community groups, if not the first one, certainly as it broadens out, would involve hospital administrators, the college administrators, the directors of nonprofit groups that we already partner with, other nonprofits in the community that provide services, and maybe we could find out who is better able in the community to provide certain services than we do. I think it's interesting, public-private partnerships are always spoken of favorably, but we have an issue we'll be discussing today where we're proposing to contract with a private corporation, and that's got a lot of people upset. But we have a lot of partnerships in the community, many of them with nonprofits. That never seems to provoke controversy, and yet it is contracting out services. We do it especially in the health and human services arena, and I believe we're thinking of doing more of that for a variety of reasons. But I don't see that this is any kind of end run around the Board of Supervisors, because any recommendations that are made will only be recommendations, and they will come back to the full board for discussion and ultimately for direction. I don't know why we're always so afraid of getting ideas from different groups of people, or why we're not even more open to that. The purpose of the organization is to provide service to the public, and so why shouldn't we hear from the public their ideas on how we could more effectively do that? We should be completely willing to have every aspect of our operation, our priorities, how we deliver the service, open to the public for examination. And if we can't defend what we're doing and why we're doing it, there might be something wrong with it.
Supervisor Pinches, then I'd like to hear public comment.
Well, when I come on this board 4 years ago, I don't know if you call it the strategic plan, but the forward planning in Mendocino County was based around building a $500 million criminal justice complex. And we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in that direction until we finally realized that we couldn't afford it. Now we're having a hard time keeping our existing deputies on the street, not alone building a $500 million complex. So, you know, it was a good plan. It made a lot of sense. But, you know, like I say, there was a lot of departments involved in that, but it come down to one thing: we just couldn't afford it. And the reality was slow to be realized. It took about 4 years. I think everybody realized right now, well, we can't afford that. But 4 years ago, that was a topic of many closed session items about buying property and all that. And it wasn't any more feasible then than it is today. But things changed, so if you start talking about a plan, well, the first thing it's got to be realistic. It can't be some grandiose idea, because it's just, especially in these economic. And I don't think there's anybody out there that's going to say that these economic times are going to get better in the maybe next decade, maybe longer than that. As the federal government, both the Democrats and Republicans, decide that we need a balanced federal budget, Mendocino County hasn't seen the bottom of this downturn yet, not even close. So whatever this strategic plan, whatever a community group comes up with, there's got to be some realism to the situation, because I watched this county spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on trying to push forward something that just wasn't doable.
Supervisor McCallum?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to add one more group, the advisory boards that the county has, and they often feel that they're either not properly utilized or that their recommendations are not given sufficient weight. And they include the Health and Human Services Advisory Board, the Mental Health Board, Policy Council on Children and Youth, the Juvenile Justice Commission, the Domestic Violence Council, and so I think we should do an effort to reach out to these groups and the municipal advisory councils as well, Walla, Laytonville, Westport.
And we have AAA and a few of the others as well.
Right, you don't get all 90,000.
Well, that's, I agree with John on that, but since we have these advisory boards, why aren't we using them? I mean, we hear over and over again, we get a 2-minute report from John or me or whatever board we happen to be sitting on at any point in time. But the advisory boards are not utilized. Here we are kind of creating, let's go out and get people who have, all I've heard is the word connectivity. I don't know what that means. Are they people that go to the right meetings at the right time on weekends or during the week or whatever? But we have this structured system in place and we spend a huge amount of time in terms of staff keeping those boards coherent, consistent, updated, and so on and so forth. It seems to me we can't see the forest because we have so many trees out there. Because we have 100 and such, I think we have about 100 committees, getting up there pretty close to it. Multiply that times 6 or 7 people per committee. We have our 600 people who are involved on a non-remunerative basis in this county, for the most part, who we are acting right now in this discussion as if, oh, they're out there. You mean we're surrounded by forests? So that part of it here is perhaps telling something about either superfluous pseudo-advisory boards, or the fact that we perhaps need to invest in fewer boards with more leverage and more authority, and that we are responsible to.
Thank you. That's why we came, is to get all the feedback of your thoughts, so that the ultimate feedback we have is as valid as we can have it being as representative as possible.
Okay.
One more group that I think we should include would be the tribal governments, which many of them have kind of been reinvigorated lately and are providing more services than they used to provide. And some of them may be in a position to partner with us to help us provide services.
Supervisor Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve, a question, I guess I'd like to look at this from perhaps another level and get your feedback. My concern, which I voiced earlier on in the year, felt that we needed the input sooner rather than later. I still don't see that core reaching out and public assessment coming forward in this process. So I referenced that, I think, the structure here with the predetermined recommendations that are going to go out and be tested in the community, I think it's lacking to some degree. But on this one, I want to get your input. So I think what residents, and a number of my colleagues have said, we've talked about the small little communities. Supervisor Brown said, you know, the sort of wall-to-wall Mendocino County, North County, South Coast, North Coast. These are all really separate little enclaves or towns or hamlets or just a loosely configured community in any kind of, with many definitions. What I think folks are really most concerned about are the real core service delivery to them. Do they have a library they can get to once a week? Do they have a bookmobile that visits them? Is the sheriff's deputy going to be there when they need the deputy? These core kinds of things are what they resonate and they respond to. So what I don't think we've done is really do a very good job of getting to individual communities, stakeholders, whatever, the public at large, and really talk about the budgetary challenges. In other words, I think the real difficult issues are not being really addressed by this scenario in front of us, and that is that the state of California is slashing our budget in every area. But they really are decimating it with respect to health and human services, which includes mental health. So how is the county going to respond? So I think it's a two-way discussion from the county saying, these are our mandates, these are the essential services, but on another level, community, we need to hear from you about how far we go. Do we just go to our mandate? And if we just go to our mandate, it's going to look like this. You're no longer going to have this, 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 and this. If we took it to another level of a 2% investment from the general fund, the service delivery would look like X, or 10% it would look like Y. And so then the complexities of that budget, but put into simplest terms, are there for the public to consume. And it's going to be a trade-off, because if you have this kind of a response here, this type of a service delivery, you may not have this one. So I think that the public hasn't been really faced with the demise of many things that we consider essential services at the county level, and we really don't have their feedback. And I think we really need more community feedback on what is it that citizens value. And I think we need to find a way to get to that, and it's challenged them with the revenue side. So I think we really need to spend more time educating the public. One example of that would be the in-home support services. People that receive those services or have friends that do or relatives, they're probably somewhat informed about it's an essential service, they value it, we need to keep that service in place. However, other people may have no knowledge about what that even means. But the disconnect has been that the state continues to cut those wages for people in our community, and then what they're trying to do is pass on to the county of Mendocino to make up the difference in the wages of those very important people that do work for elderly and disabled in the home. So there's also a vacuum with respect to accurate information about where the budgetary shortfalls are coming from. I think the public needs education on that, and I think that's going to be essential given the tax measure that's going to be on the ballot, so they know what those dollars are desperately needed for. And even within that context of enhanced revenue, there still are going to be reductions. We're experiencing them now, and they're still going to keep coming. So, but I think the public needs more information. So I'm really interested in a little bit of money being spent on qualitative information on flip charts that could go into communities, give people this input, and really pull from them in a number of ways. What is it that they value with respect to essential Mendocino County services, and what are they more inclined to give up? Or what are they inclined to pay a little bit more in the hopes of continuing to receive it?
And you were asking, you wanted some
Well, your input
feedback
about
how to do that?
Yes, because I'm not sure that this process really tackles that, and I think that is far more difficult. I think it's more controversial, and I think we've been remiss in not doing that and going through the budgetary process we've gone through to date in this calendar year. And that's why I haven't supported a lot of the directions we've gone, because we have absolutely not taken that on. It's challenging, it's difficult, and I don't think we're doing it. And I don't know that this process gets us there.
Well, my response to that, if you're asking from a design standpoint, I think that's what you're asking. We certainly could do that. It's more, and it would be very valuable to do. In this county, for certain organizations, I've done that very type of approach, in which the organization was facing a large budgetary cut, 50%.
Right.
And the challenge was first educate them to what's mandated, what are all the programs, what do they do, and then now you pick, and they were key providers and utilizers of those services. And saying, okay, you have to imagine you're the board that's to make these decisions. What would you make? It could be included in this process, and if the board felt, yep, that's what we want, it's a key area. I mean, you could say it's under service redesign, but this is much more specific. And again, that's why we're coming to the board and saying, help us so that we're not doing this. We're doing it with your input, your direction. So that it's useful to you, because this is what it's for, is to be able to say to you, here's the best of the thinking, but it has to reflect what you need and want in order to make policy decisions in the future.
And I want to support Supervisor Colfax's comments about the advisory boards. I think it's essential that we get in this initial community group. If you get advisory board input in the form of a couple individuals, you've really had, it's value added because they're of an advisory board. So I want to support that as well.
Another group that I think should be included would be the special districts, which we have 55, 56 or so special districts, particularly the fire districts. This board has made a commitment to the rural fire districts over the last several years that we would try to assist them in identifying a stable source of funding. Some of the small districts really struggle. So one outcome of this process should be, I think, that it is a priority to follow through on that commitment, identify a source of funding, and take the steps to implement it. And I think what direction that should go would be best decided by the fire districts themselves. So I would hope there'd be a process to work with them to identify what their preferred course of action would be. Staff could then evaluate it for how realistic it is, and a recommendation could be made to the board. In terms of soliciting from the citizens, what programs do you, what services that we're currently providing would you like to see stay, and which are you willing to give up? In part, I think if we identify the service priorities, I look at it as two ways of coming at the same thing.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
May I just make
we
two
need
comments
to,
before you go?
sure, and we do need to move on.
Yes, I just wanted to make two comments.
Something else to do today.
Really, I would agree, and I appreciate all the input from this board, and particularly I would agree with Supervisor Smith's comments about the difficulty this year in working through the budget. And clearly, we were up to $11.6 million in the general fund revenue shortfall. I believe the reason we had so much difficulty and we're not done yet is because we don't have those priorities set. And I think that we have allowed the budget to set our priorities, which has been the biggest struggle that I have seen and that have personally been involved with. So the process is not so much developing this very extensive 5-year strategic plan that's either going to sit on a shelf somewhere or land up in the round file, but to really look at developing those priorities so that this board could set public policy, and that going forward, those budget decisions, whether those decisions are because of a shortfall or because we're balanced, that those budget decisions will be based on the priorities rather than the budget determining those priorities. So that is the whole goal of what we would like to achieve. And I just wanted to clarify that for this board and for the public. And also in the information, and it's not on the PowerPoint, but we are asking board members to submit stakeholder recommendations. So we are not moving forward with any groups or community input without getting those recommendations from the 5 people.
Yeah, I'd like to go to public comment. Anyone that would like to speak, please do so, but state your name for the record.
I'll speak. Louis Bigfoot. I didn't know I was going to speak. I usually don't even enjoy these meetings. I mean, it's sort of like an interior house situation. But what I wanted to mention, two things. One is think local. Try to keep the money local, the money that's spent. You know, I think we'll get the most benefit if we're want to think local. I mean, because I know that's not necessarily the greatest savings, because you know, like they're doing this building of these houses that are next to Howard Hospital, and all the local people were putting all their money together into building these buildings next to the hospital, these fancy new buildings that are being built up there, which you've probably seen or haven't seen. But they're being made, all the labor is being contracted out of the county by one of the richest landowners in the county. So that's just how that worked. You know, it's like Caltrans. John says that's local jobs. Those aren't any local jobs there. That's all. I went there and asked the guys that show up in Caltrans truck. They're all from Sacramento. So it's like we have two levels here, you know. I mean, is it local or is it not local? Let's be honest about it. Anyway, Caltrans, that's not local. That's all out of town. It's not one job. Maybe it's, you know. In fact, it's hardship to town of Willits because they're going to have to take over 101 at some point. I'm not done.
We need.
That's my frustration, is that I sit here all day and I get 3 minutes and I get told to shut up. I'm sorry, but I got one more thing to say. When I first started following the board, you know, there wasn't the internet. Everything was like a piece of paper, you know, put it in a newspaper. And then we started, you know, broadcasting the Board of Supervisors live on KMEC radio, another local product, little rusty, a little off edge because it's new people doing new things, but we got some of the message out to the people. Now, what I would like to suggest is that, oh, by the way, the website is fabulous. That was thanks to Jason. You know, we have now live broadcasts. Think of that. You can actually watch the board. Now, what I'd like to propose is that somehow the county can get response from the public to the board live from Gold Island, from Fort Bragg, from Willits, from Laytonville, and Polo. Now, I know you don't want to spend any money. I'm just saying if that was in the cooker, it could be a volunteer network of people, and they could watch it on TV, which is thanks to Jason and the good work done on Channel 3. And then we could have a response, but not at 9 in the morning. I don't recommend that, you know, because that means they can't listen to the morning's meeting and make a response at 9 o'clock. Because at 9 o'clock, that's my other suggestion. So think local. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you for your, anyone else, please? Sir.
Mark Johnson with the Employers Council. I would agree and support most of what I've heard this morning. I think this is headed in the right direction. The Employers Council is an organization which was formed in large part to represent the voices of the private sector and business in speaking to government. I think oftentimes we feel that we are focusing on individual specific actions and we come across as being very critical and negative. I think if we have an opportunity to be more involved in a bigger objective planning process, we would have a better input to the board. And we will have some further comments at the public expression at 10:30.
It's going to be tough getting out of there at 10:30. It looks like we won't be going in, probably back in. What time is closed session?
10:30 to 11.
Oh, okay.
Closed session. Oh, I'm sorry, it's 10 to 10:30. Right.
Yes.
For this meeting into closed session.
So, anyone else?
Hi, Melanie Lightbody speaking as an individual in this case. I just wanted to thank the board for some of their input and to say that I personally have heard a lot about connectivity. That's very important. But I wanted to also say that something that concerns me are the people who are not connected. And so that I hope that when you're focusing, you're also reaching out those who are not all connected all in our community, but are in fact disconnected from what's going on.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing no one, we'll come back to the board. I think staff has direction. So we will go into closed session.
Thank you very much.